Greetings and salutations, everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at the American Revolution. This is part 2 of the American Revolution videos. Today we're going to be taking a look specifically at the conflict, some of the major important people, and ultimately resolution of the American Revolution. Now this is going to be really just hitting the high points, and let's get started. There were a lot of initial causes of the American Revolution. One of the big ones for a lot of people is that the colonists felt that their individual rights were being violated. Most colonists were still in the mentality that they were British citizens before they were part of the American colonies, and this was one of the big things. Specifically, as Englishmen, they had a lot of serious rights that had been established by this point. Most notably, that they had a right in their government. Parliament, specifically, gave rights to people, gave rights to the ability for people to do things. And they believed that this wasn't fair, they didn't have a voice. One of the big battle cries from these colonists was that there was no taxation without representation. That was what was right. They were being taxed by the British government, but they didn't have a say in the British government. They understood they were going to be taxed. I mean, taxation is always a thing. It was Twain who said there's only two certainties in life, death and taxes. They knew they were going to get taxed. They understood that part. They just didn't like the fact that they didn't have any movement in this. Can't talk about notable individuals without starting with Washington. I mean, the guy was a gentleman landowner. He had fought for the British during the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War. He was the commander of the Constitutional Army. He will become the first president. Very, very popular, very direct to what needs to be done. Heavily influenced by the Roman consul Cincinnatus. Believed that the power of the rule should not be an absolute power of the rule. And a lot of the stuff he does is going to set up for a lot of later presidents we're going to see. Jefferson, aside from being a young lawyer, is the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. He was the third president of the United States. He was the first Secretary of State. And his ideas would really cement the concept of the representative government that the United States would create, that government was a thing that everyone should be involved in. Ben Franklin, I mean, this guy, his story goes forever. We could talk about him incessantly. He was an inventor, he was an engineer, he was a scientist, he was a diplomat, he was an international playboy. And aside from all of this stuff, one of the most important things he did is he was instrumental in helping to bring France into the war, getting France on our side. Him being at the constitutional conventions gave those conventions international notice. If he was there, clearly something good was going on. James Madison, the man who would be the father of the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton, the author of the Federalist Papers. These are the things that wrote to people and said, we need a Constitution, something bigger than the Articles of Confederation. Both of these guys were big beforehand, but would be giants after the Revolution. There were a lot of initial causes of the American Revolution. One of the big ones started with, well, let's take a look at this map. You've got the idea of where the loyalists are located and where the patriots are located, where those who are loyal to the crown are and where those who are loyal to this new government are located. And from this map you can see that there's a lot going on for all individuals engaged. And this is going to be Jefferson, aside from being a young lawyer, is the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. He was the third president of the United States. He was the first Secretary of State. And his ideas would really cement the concept of the representative government that the United States would create, that government was a thing that everyone should be involved in. The strategies on either side were really very different. The Americans knew that the distance from England to the American colonies was going to be a decisive thing that they could use for their favor. They knew it's 4 to 6 weeks for anything to get one way or another. It's a war of attrition. They just had to keep wearing down the British soldiers. While the British primarily were interested in breaking the colonies in half, the northern sector of industry versus the southern sectors of agricultural production. The Americans were fighting new guerrilla tactic styles. They were using marksmen. They were using new long rifles that were much more accurate, and they are going to not always directly fight the enemy. They may hit and run. They may lay a trap. They may fire on officers, which that last one was a big no-no in virtually all conflict before this, but it is the reality of the situation. The British are attempting to blockade different ports because the British know the Americans have allies in Europe, and England doesn't want to directly go to war with the American colonies and other European powers. So if they can just limit what the Americans are getting, that's going to help them out. The Americans did work to get different European powers to help them. Most infamously would be the French, and that really was a tipping point. And the British had a divide and conquer mentality. They knew that there were people within the colonists who were still very, very loyal to the British government. And the British wanted to use those people to get what they needed done. To this, just because. And they fall back to their Camp Valley Forge and have a really harsh winter there. This is where von Steuben shows up, that Prussian general I was talking about earlier. He is responsible for training the soldiers. He's responsible for helping get the model of the American army together in a way that it had never been before, and really helps shore up the Americans to fight when they next get their opportunity. The turning point for the war is Saratoga, the Battle of Saratoga. This was a decisive battle that took place, and it was decisive for a variety of reasons. Most infamously, this was the Northern Campaign getting utterly routed, utterly turned around, and British General Burgoyne being soundly defeated. All this takes place in September and October of 1777, and it is really important. The divide and conquer tactics that the British had can only work if they can divide and conquer. With the North now thoroughly taken, the British now have to focus on the South. And the Southern strategy really wasn't that great. The British thought that there were going to be a lot more loyalists in the South. They believed, and to a very good degree, that America was making money off the stuff they were growing in the South, so that if you could stop the production of that, you could stop the economy, which would stop trade, which would isolate and thoroughly weaken the colonies. And the British do have a number of noteworthy victories, but there's really never a giant turnaround, and they never really are able to truly pacify the countryside. It's also helpful that Nathaniel Greene was a very competent, very skillful, very accomplished U.S. general at this time, operating in the southern area. Jefferson, aside from being a young lawyer, is the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. He was the third president of the United States. He was the first Secretary of State, and his ideas would really cement the concept of the representative government that the United States would create. That government was a thing that everyone should be involved in. late 1781, surrenders. And this is the surrender that's going to end the war. It's another 2 years before a treaty is drawn up between the American, now states, no longer colonies, and the British government. This is the end. After the war is over, the colonists had been restricted to the Proclamation Line, which was essentially the Appalachian Mountains. I'm using that as a wide barometer, but it does work for this. But now they find that everything that color that the colonists are, please forgive the poor colorblind man, is technically open for exploration, expansion, colonization. And they're going to do that. The American Revolution was significant because it showed, for the first time, a real break from colonies and imperial powers. And larger than this, it showed that a representative government could come into existence. You didn't have to follow a monarchy. You didn't have to follow a entity from hundreds, or in this case, thousands of miles away. And the American Revolution is going to be the thing that's going to motivate and create much more interesting, much more important and influential revolutions. The French, the Haitian, the Russian, the Mexican, you can kind of get my point from this. So this has been just a general overview of the American Revolution. Hope you enjoyed and hope you learned something. See you next time.